Okay, good morning. We're joined by my co-host, Professor Tootle, who is a history professor at the College of the Sequoias. Isn't this formal, Professor? Isn't this great? He has a BA in history from Cal Poly, a master's in history from Fresno State, and a PhD from Ohio University. He's one of the country's premier conservative historians. I know you say you're one of the top 5,000. You say, right?
Yeah,
Okay, all right. Nice to see you, Professor Tootle.
great to be here.
Okay, so Professor, I brought in a longtime friend of yours who's somebody you greatly admire. And the reason he's here today is this is the 250th anniversary year of our nation. I'm telling you, I really think this is a big deal. I think everyone alive should pause what they're doing as a citizen and rethink things and themselves and their relationship to their country. I hope we all pause and do something really important for ourselves and our nation this year. I think celebrating 250 years of the foremost country that has established freedom and liberty and an emblem, a bright light of good things around the world. I just love this year. This is going to be a good year, Professor. And we've got a historian and an author. I think this is Mr. Williams. I think this is your seventh book, if that's correct, coming out in June. Is it your seventh?
I think it is my seventh. So yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
see, I've done my research. So, Tony Williams is with us. His newest book is called Divided Over the Declaration, the enduring debate about the meaning of America, with David, co-authored by David Bobb, who I believe is the CEO or director of the Bill of Rights Institute, where you were a senior fellow. I guess this year
Correct.
you'll also be teaching on the Constitution at the Christopher Newport University Center for American Studies. What a cool thing. What a good life you're living.
Yeah.
Tony, I think your book has the potential for being, obviously I haven't read it. You haven't written, I mean, you've written it, but it hasn't been published. I think it has the potential for being one of the more important books coming out this year. So is that correct? That's the first question. Is this a meaningful book? Are you really proud of it, or is it something you just kind of wrote down?
No, I mean,
That's the question.
I hope it is. I hope it's one of the more important books of the year. I think that I hope David and my co-author David Bobb and I hope that it's the basis of conversation and in getting us talking again and who we are as Americans and what we believe in, seeing our common identity, our common national character, seeing that we're all in it together.
Love
But
this.
from the very beginning, even over the question of declaring independence, we have sort of been divided over what this thing means, and we've been in conversation about it, and it's been sort of a brilliant and beautiful, but also sort of heart-wrenching debate at times. But I like to think so. We're terribly excited about it. Let me just say that.
Love it.
I would say that it's really the culmination of about 30 to 35 years of each of us thinking about these things, and then over the last 20 years as friends, and then the last 12 years at the Bill of Rights Institute, working together and just having daily discussions and deliberations and creating content for teachers and students and citizens on the Declaration and on America. So it's really the culmination of that 35 years of thinking about this stuff and really taking it seriously.
So, thank you for that overview.
Yeah.
Let's switch to Professor Tootle for a second. Uh, so, I have a political science degree and a law degree, and I've been doing public policy campaigns and government work for over 40 years. I'm older than both of you. And if it wasn't, this is our 135th show that Professor and I have done over the last 4.5, 5 years. And Professor, I wish I would have had you at college or law school. I'm surprised that you've been able to teach me stuff. I mean, really substantive stuff. For most of my life, I thought the Constitution was the framework, the bedwork, the bedrock, what it means to be an American. And you have taken me through an evolution of don't be ignoring the Declaration of Independence. Sure, the Constitution's really important, John. Good at you. You studied that a lot in law school. I did. But we didn't study the Declaration in law school, I don't think. I don't think we had a class in that. And you have kind of taken me on this path. Not that I was wrong, but I think that is common, that that I'm not positive I knew what it meant to be an American before I met you, well, 15 years ago at the American Enterprise Institute, or 10 or 12 years ago. So, Professor Tootle, can you add an insight before we go back to Tony? Can you add some insight on what means to be an American from a history professor? Uh, Declaration, is it the Constitution? Is it something else? Give some perspective and then ask a question of Tony.
Well, I think that Lincoln's understanding of America is the proper understanding of America, that you have to look at not just the rules, but you have to look at the intent for. So looking at the Constitution is absolutely important, and it's meant to be the structure of uh, implement how these things are going to be implemented. But but if you want to know what the Constitution means, that you should look at the Declaration, and that there's this conversation. And I think Tony's new book is probably going to be an excellent explanation of this. But it's a conversation between a lot of human beings, a lot of conversations about not just one ideal. There is no single ideal. That there are a lot of minds thinking about how to implement a lot of ideas and get that into a structure that maximizes their um, um, their framework for how this can work moving forward.
Okay, so Professor, and this is for both of you. I read the Declaration of Independence again this morning. Read the whole thing, and actually, I didn't skim it. I read word for word. I probably read it, I don't know, 100 times in my life, and I still, forgive me, maybe I'm not a good student. That's true. I still kind of view it as a revolutionary document. It's a long list of grievances, and I know a half a year ago you led me through 5 or 6 principles in the Declaration alone that say no, it's not just a list of things against the king. Um, in fact, I'm missing the whole point if I'm just seeing it as a list of grievances against the king. Um, but do you think I'm in the minority, gentlemen? Who pays attention to the Declaration and knows what it really means? Is it do all of us, and I'm just the last kid in the classroom that didn't pay attention? Tony, can you give me a response to that? Professor Tootles guided me, so I kind of know his answer. I want to know your answer, though. Am I alone?
No, no, I think it shows some of the division that we're still divided over the Declaration today. It was a revolutionary document. It was set in its time, right? It did declare independence along with Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independence, which was adopted by the Second Continental Congress on July 2nd, 1776. And it did separate us into our own sovereigns, a sovereign state with some kind of national union or national government kind of holding it together, kind of a league of friendship, but more in the Continental Congress. I would agree with Lincoln that it was sort of more of a national union. But it wasn't just, a diplomatic, expression to the world. It wasn't just a revolutionary document. It didn't just have a list of grievances against King George, although it was all those things. But it was more. As Stephen alluded to Lincoln, I'll bring up my apple of gold, what Lincoln called an apple of gold in a picture of silver, which is, of course, the Constitution. Stephen, I know you're not the only one that prop.
Yeah.
So
I
I
was going
think
to
I
say we
remember
all have to have that prop, right?
saying it last time. No, I always start with that when I teach my course on the Constitution, and you have to start with the principles of the Declaration. What are those ideals? Well, they're ideals that we've deliberated and sort of fought over, been divided over, but been unified by as well. We are a creedal nation, right? We have some simple ideas and principles. As Stephen said, there are several that come out of the Declaration. One is that We have rights. These rights come from our creator. They precede government or society, and they're immutable. They're built into the fabric of our nature. They're inviolable. We are also entitled to we also believe in the idea that we're all men are created equal, right? They're not actually all equal, which has been a huge debate in American history. Um, but they're created equal, and that confers a certain equality of dignity, of human dignity. It leads to an assertion that we're equal in our rights, right? We're all equal in our rights, and we can also equally give consent to this government, right? We live in a republic, a representative government, and one of the bases of that government, right in the Declaration, is the consent of the governed, of representation, of consent, that we all have an equal voice in this thing. I know it doesn't always feel like that, but that is the ideal. And we've been contending over even the meaning of these very ideals for 250 years. And that's okay, right? I mean, that's politics. That's self-governance. And as we apply these principles to the creation of policy, we disagree over those policies, whether it's slavery and the expansion of slavery in the West in the 1800s, or whether it's about the Spanish-American War, which we write about in the book in 1898, and whether we should what's our role in the world. These are all sort of lasting questions of the American polity. Is sort of, size of government, are all men created equal? Who can give their consent? What's our role in the world? These are all really, really big questions that have been debated. But we always come back, and I think what's wonderful is that as Frederick Douglass entitled his newspaper, it's sort of been our North Star, right? It's been our ring bolt, as he also says, this declaration. It's been our electric cord, as Lincoln called it, or our apple of gold. All these sort of metaphors for saying how central this document, this thing is, expressing who we are as a people. And one final point. I mean, we're not a nation of blood and soil, right? I mean, you don't have to go back 18 generations of hereditary aristocracy. Where we do have national borders, but it's not an us versus them mentality. We are to be an American means you embrace these ideals, right? Whether you're from another place, like for example, a lot of students, Stephen's wonderful students at the College of the Sequoias, or you're a new immigrant to this country, or whether your family has been here since the Mayflower. That embracing these ideals is what it means to be an American. That's at least how I see it.
So there's so much there, but before I
Right.
go to my there, Professor Tootle.
I agree with everything Tony said, but I would just emphasize that it was a revolutionary document, and that's okay. This is something that was meant to be a new order for the ages. This is a reordering of all of human relationships. It is a break in the history of humanity. And that is important for people to understand that all of human history was based on essentially security relationships, protecting people because of their identification with a particular group, and that's how people saw themselves, and that's how people saw the world. But what was revolutionary about the American Revolution was that it made it possible for human beings to live in peace. But and that peace is what makes all of the regular functioning of government possible. The idea that you can be independent. Well, in order to experience your independence, you have to be free from violence. In order to experience liberty, you have to be left alone. In order to be equal, you can't have somebody exercising violence on you when you try to participate in the political process. But very, and this, I feel like I'm just echoing everything Tony said, but that it creates the preconditions for justice. It
Mhm.
means that we can all have a we can create a culture of justice. It doesn't mean we will, but it means that we can. We can be citizens. It's possible to have a culture and live in a culture that approximates justice. And I love the point that Tony made that we're not a nation of blood and soil. You can't repeat that enough. That we don't have to accept new, old, or ancient versions of racism and take on that identity ourselves. That we have the right to insist upon our own identities and being a creedal nation, a nation, a people made up of ideas. It frees us from thinking of ourselves as nothing but members of ancient groups or taking on the identities of people who are created by people who are our enemies. Just because somebody else says you are fill in the blank XYZ, you can simply say, well, that's how you see me, but that's not how I see myself. I see myself as a citizen, and I'm entitled to all the rights and liberties and all the dignity of the ancient forefathers. And I can claim those forefathers as my own.
Yeah, and
Tony,
I'd
jump in.
love to add some beautiful points Stephen made. I'll echo that and say, one of the great changes to the Declaration was when Thomas Jefferson wrote subjects and then scratched it out and wrote citizens.
Yeah,
And I think that means all the difference. And his point about justice is absolutely right. I mean, James Madison, what is it, in Federalist 51 says justice is the end of government, it's the end of civil society. And justice doesn't just mean social justice, although it does mean that. But it means living under a just government, a government, a society that respects your rights, that respects your liberty, that, as Stephen said, leaves you alone, and lets you engage in in active citizenship and self-governance. I mean, that is the end of government. And Madison had it right. And I'll only finish with this by saying that, some people back in the 1800s, John Calhoun and others, but then also people today. They want to ignore that second paragraph, right? They want to pretend like it doesn't exist, or they disagree with it, or they say it wasn't necessary. And various arguments are made, but the simple fact is it's in there, right? And from the very beginning, whether it's enslaved people launching freedom suits and freedom petitions to escape slavery and live freely, from the minute these ideals were sort of pronounced, people latched onto them for justice, for freedom, for equality. And I would argue that's a very good thing. But clearly, we've also been, debating these things for 250 years as well.
So, Tony, I want you to do a summary statement of what it means to be an American. Context before. Professor Tootle and I met in Washington, D.C. at the inaugural leadership initiative of the American Enterprise Institute. And in my layman's terms, what I heard from Arthur Brooks and Jonah Goldberg and a variety of other experts who were brought in to speak with us, they determined that you really can't emphasize what it means to be an American in Washington, D.C. Not that they're not Americans, it's just they've got their own power structure, money, power thing going on that the average American just doesn't really even appreciate. It doesn't want to appreciate. And that if you want to emphasize what it means to be an American, you need to go out to Colorado and I don't know, Visalia and Lubbock. And you just need to be out in the real world talking to real people doing real things. And that's the reason we started this conversation over 5 years ago is we wanted to not talk to each other as two degreed people. We wanted to talk to anybody who wanted to join us. And there's a few that have joined us, and we're going to get to their questions in a second. Just real people doing real things. So big context. If we either read your book or don't, What should we be
Pre-order
thinking?
it on Amazon though right now, whether you
Excellent.
read it or not. Right?
Excellent. Thanks, Professor Tootle. What should we really be thinking about as Americans? What it means to be an American, what it means to be a citizen. If we're right, maybe we need to reevaluate, like I have. I had to change my viewpoint on the connection between the Declaration and the Constitution. After 40 years, as a 55-year-old, I had to do this. So, what do Americans need to be think, or not need to be? What should we be? What do you encourage us to be thinking about the 250th year of our nation?
Great question. Big question. But the core one, right? The core question of who we are as a people. I think that it boils down to something very simple that we live freely. We live in a free society. We live under free government that allows for human flourishing, right? Allowing us to live our lives as we choose, right? Within the boundaries of natural law and the rule of law and so forth. But that we engage in citizenship, right? And I know you wanted to talk about that today. I mean, the big problem today, I think, one of the big problems in terms of how we understand government is we always look to the national government, right? And frankly, we always look to the president, right? Who's president? What can the president do about the price of my eggs or chicken at my local grocery store? And who's responsible for this mess? But I think the reality is we should and we do, I think, still largely govern ourselves, right? In our communities. I mean, states and so who we are as Americans, governance, self-governance should be done on a local level, the state level, that the national government has a very important role to play within its powers, within its constitutional prerogatives. But I mean, the reality is when we live our lives, we do that on a local basis, right? And we engage in citizenship and self-governance, and we go, we have school board meetings and education and laws are made locally, and we live our lives and we engage with each other in the community, right? So we go to Little League games and we go to Kiwanis and Rotary meetings and we shop at local businesses or chain stores that are local and we get to know people and we engage in that kind of citizenship where we have to engage in certain virtues, right? Civic virtues. So we have to be moderate in how we approach other people. We're not, right? But we should be, and I think most of us still are on a daily basis. And we have to be respectful of other people's rights, but also respectful of their equal dignity as a fellow citizen and as a human being. And so I think so much of what goes on in civil society, but then also in local self-governance, involves compromise. It involves negotiation. It involves listening to the other person. It involves actually talking and deliberating. And then, Congress should be engaged in that business. It not always is, but it should be as well. And politics should be less about, sort of performative platforms on social media and more about the hard work of governing. Because, we live in a republic. We live in a constitutional republic, democracy, and so we engage in this popular self-rule. And we are the government, and we sort of get the government we deserve. And we need to do more of that kind of deliberation on all levels of government, but also in local civil society, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, on an everyday basis. I think that's sort of the heart of America. And I think that we've really corrupted our understanding of it by putting it all in the national government, putting it all in the power of the presidency, and in not speaking to each other.
So it's a reprise of de Tocqueville, this this
Yeah.
common people doing good work with each other. That what makes America America is people caring about each other and engaging in meaningful ways at the local level. Is that right? I don't mean to. Maybe you're not a de
Yeah.
Tocqueville fan, but
No, I think you're right. I think, we have sort of the Jeffersonian and Continental Congress, the Revolutionaries founders' ideals about government and about liberty. We have sort of a Madisonian constitution that we're living under, but the hard work of self-government and living in a free society is very Tocquevillian in nature.
okay.
And we sort of forget him and that lesson to our detriment. But it's really that's the kind of work we're doing at the Bill of Rights Institute, trying to get people to engage in that local self-government. We want to encourage human flourishing in a free society and really engage in active citizenship, right? Because we think it's just serving on juries, voting once a year, or really every 4 years when there's a presidential election. Citizenship is just so much more than that, and it's really the basis. It provides sort of the foundation to live and engage with each other within the context of all those grand ideals that the founders are talking about.
Thank you. Professor Tootle, you have 2 minutes, then I'm going to open it up to Q&A, and we have 15 minutes left. That's
Oh,
it. So,
okay.
Professor Tootle, conversation for 2 minutes.
I would just to piggyback on what Tony said that the and your initial question, I don't think you need to change your viewpoint on the Declaration. The Declaration. You never get to put it away and say, I've got it down now. In the same way, we would find it strange that a Christian would go to church and say, no, I'm perfect. That we would all laugh at that person, right? This the idea behind the ideals behind the United States are things that you keep on applying these principles to modern questions. So they should always be alive in you. They should never be foreign to you. They are inalienable. They should be in your bones. So new issues pop up every single year, but we don't need to go out and say, "Oh, we can abandon the wisdom of the founding because now we need a bunch of new ideas." No, we need to say, "Okay, we have a new challenge. What, how do we apply the ideals of the founding to this new challenge?" And that led me to a thought about this constant name calling or labels that get thrown around about like who's a conservative or I could never I had a friend say I could never fly a flag anymore because I wouldn't want to be associated with the people who fly flags, you know. And I the definition of a patriot is someone who loves the ideals of the founding. That if you experience and you don't get to claim to be a patriot. I guess you can claim to be whatever you want, but I will certainly not recognize you as being patriotic if to look at the Bill of Rights Institute's list of virtues and vices. When I'm thinking about who I'm going to vote for, I want somebody with courage and honor and humility and integrity and just a commitment to justice and moderation and prudence and respect and responsibility. And I can love those principles as much as I want, and that's what makes me patriotic. And when I see a leader who engages in cowardice and dishonor and hubris and self-deception and injustice, immoderation, imprudence, and contempt and irresponsibility, I say, that is a leader I do not support. So again, our commitment is supposed to be to the principles. And then we're applying those principles to the questions of today as they arise. Because every single day you're going to be confronted with what's that line from True Grit? Life is vexing enough without pondering hypotheticals. You every single day of your life, you will be confronted with issues. And if you think to yourself, oh, courage, honor, humility, integrity, justice, moderation, prudence, respect, responsibility, now what? Now, how should I handle this issue? And especially in civic life, when you're thinking about how your fellow citizens are to be governed, those are pretty good principles, and we don't need new ones. We just need to apply the old ones.
I love that. Before we go to questions, Professor, will you open your pantry door, please?
Oh, I would, except for I've already taken it down.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. God, we know each other too well.
Yeah, I knew that. Well, when you saw, because I usually keep the founding principles of the
Nice.
Declaration of, or the Bill of
And,
Rights.
and I Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
in anticipation, when I saw the title of the show, I pulled them out of my pantry so
thank
that
you.
I could have them in
Okay,
front
and
of me.
I
And
hope
then
there's a
lo and
question.
behold, Tony Williams is, already here.
I thought that was a pleasant surprise. I hoped it would be a pleasant surprise for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so friends, this is your time. We have what I'm lousy at math. 12 minutes left. Susan, you're an occasional caller, longtime listener, occasional caller. Like to go to people that aren't with us as often first. Do you have a question or a comment, Susan? You're on your iPhone, so maybe you're driving. Let's give you 2 more seconds. All right, jump back in if you would like to. All right. Oh no.
I
All
do
right.
not have any questions. I just thank you for having these conversations and my ability to be here when I can.
Okay, don't hang up, Susan. Susan, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the American experience? You've seen many of my conversations over the years, and you've been on a half a dozen of these shows. Are you optimistic, or do you have a lot of concerns?
I would say that I tend to be optimistic. I'm just one of those people. My father used to call me Pollyanna, but I wouldn't be realistic to say I don't have some concerns
Well,
because I do.
you have the subject matter expert with us on America, and two subject matter experts. Honest, you don't have a question. It's something they can give some insight to you to give you comfort for the year 2026. Anything?
Um, no, I'm kind of in a watch and see mode right now.
Fair enough. And you and everybody else. But I'm urging all of us as citizens to think deeper and act stronger this year in a thoughtful, kind way. And in Professor Tootle's language, to renounce violence in all its forms and a full measure of citizenship. I mean, let's truly be Americans this year. So, anyway, I know you are, and feel free to jump back in if more time. Okay, Jeff or Patrick. Patrick, you're probably the second least regular caller. You have a question or comment?
I guess just an observation as you all were talking that um, it's so easy for us to think about these documents or these conversations or these events kind of in isolation as standalone things. Um, and it's much harder for us to remember that the people who were living in those times were living them in context. And so to be able to see them in context and interact with them in context today is something I'm trying to get better at and um, just explore more. But appreciate the conversation. These are always helpful and really insightful.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So let me ask Patrick's hardball question that he didn't ask. Tony, all men are created equal. What? I mean, that didn't include a lot of folks, including up to the 1970s when women couldn't open a checking account without their husband, or they couldn't get divorced, or gays, or blacks, interracial men. I mean, just go on and on and on and on. So the hardball question, really? This is our document that we love? It didn't include me.
Yeah. Well, I
Briefly.
mean, so we talk that is usually the main question we get. Teachers, professors, when I do public speaking, and we address it in the book. We have a chapter on slavery and the founding. We don't shy away from it. On the women of Seneca Falls, using the Declaration for the right to vote. We've got a chapter on Martin Luther King and John Lewis and their respective speeches at the March on Washington, claiming their rights, and so we face this head on. I mean, it's really sort of the heart of our book, divided over the Declaration. That a lot of people said, "Well, what about me?" And the thing I like to point out, sort of in a nutshell, to answer your question, because I could talk about this for hours, is that Jefferson really meant all men are created equal. I mean, even Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, said that was true. Stephens just said Jefferson was wrong, but he admitted that he really meant all people, mankind. Just like when we grew up, you talked about mankind. It meant humans. It meant everyone. But although everyone was included in this universal principle, which was also true because other people from around the world have also latched onto this document and said, yeah, well, it includes us too. So it's a universal principle of the Enlightenment, but in a practical way, not all were equal, right? Not all were free. We know that because of slavery and patriarchy, etc. The beautiful thing, though, is that document set a standard, right? It set a standard, as Stephen said, in a world of monarchy and aristocracy and despotism, that men are equal and meant to be free, meaning everyone. So, I don't think we need to look for hidden intentions. And did Jefferson really mean all property owning white straight males? Or I think Charles Francis Adams said something very interesting. The son of John Quincy, uh, he said, "Look, Jefferson was a wordsmith. He really meant what he wrote, and he could easily have said all white men, but he didn't say that." And it's been the standard. This universal principle was embraced by slaves with their freedom petitions. It was embraced by Frederick Douglass as true for everyone. It was embraced by Lincoln for everyone. It was embraced by Seneca Falls for everyone. The people of the civil rights movement thought that Jefferson really meant all men are created equal. It just wasn't a reality yet. Martin Luther King called it a promissory note, an uncashed check, and that they were there to cash it, that it was that very declaration that made slavery a contradiction, right, with freedom and with the ideals of America. So by laying down that standard for all time, future Americans could make a claim on that liberty and make a claim on that equality. And I think it's unfolded, not in sort of with a crooked path, right? And not always very neatly with a lot of division. But it has unfolded whereby people have really actually believed Jefferson meant all men are created equal and made a claim on enjoying that liberty and equality. So it's a really important question to ask, and it's a really important question to answer too, because students
You
want to
want
know,
people to
citizens want
all
to know,
you want
people want to know.
you want to be inclusive. You want
Yeah,
everyone who has that ideal to feel like they're a part of it and
right,
mean it. It's
right,
not some just abstract ideal. You want them to live it.
right, right, and that's the standard too of virtue, right? Is it coming back to Stephen's listing the BRI virtues? Is that you can have ideals all day, but you have to live up to them. That's the definition of virtue, right? Living up to standards and living up to truths. And we fail as human beings, yes, but that's the idea. And so while we have failed along the way, it's also been the source by which people appeal to. They make that claim on those ideals to make them a reality for those who were excluded.
Lovely. Professor, we have 4 minutes left to our conversation this morning, so a brief retort or a response.
Just agree with everything he said. Sounds like just blanket statement. I agree with everything Tony says. Now let me add to it. That yes, it is important to understand and to try to tie this together with the previous comment that it's a revolutionary document that needs to, and as Patrick said, needs to be understood in context. This is a statement of ideals that are dropped into an imperfect world. And look, no, and if you want to know, and as for Jefferson being a wordsmith, look at the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, where he specifically refers to black people several times as being men, human, and condemns slavery. And all evidence points to the idea that um, the everybody we would call a revolutionary father or participant in this government creation I don't know, program. Uh, Imagine that they had 100 beliefs, and you put those into a bag, and it's like everybody believed in 90 of them, and they were all the different 90. There were people on the extremes who said, "Oh, we're not going far enough here. We've gone too far there." But this is what they could agree on as a path forward. And it is wrong to assume that the people of the past were all cynical. We know people in our own lives who are not cynical. We know people who are completely sincere in their beliefs. And you should assume that there were people in the past who were sincere in their beliefs. You should also assume that there were people in the past who were self-interested, who had egos, and that all of the founders had that stuff as well. But Lincoln was clear, when he was talking about issues of human liberty, he said, that said, that meant, right? They said it and they meant it. It was a sincere belief. And even in this document that's sometimes used to condemn Lincoln, his letter to Horace Greeley, where he says, I would not end slavery if it did this or that or that. And people say, the North was not fighting over slavery. Um, but he ends that letter by saying, I intend no modification of my oft expressed idea that all men everywhere should be free. I'm paraphrasing. I can't quote it from memory, um, but that is the ideal, and it means everybody. But it also means, as I said earlier, we don't get to stop in this process. These ideals will never be achieved. There will never be heaven on earth. So that means that what we have to do as citizens is keep applying these ideals, making things a little bit better, and then come back next year and roll up our sleeves and get to work again.
I love that. Okay, we are almost out of time, so we've got to go to lightning round. Tony, could you go a couple minutes, just 2 or 3 minutes more, or you have a hard stop?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I
Well,
only have a
don't do
book to
that. We
finish.
usually go for an hour and a half, so don't
No,
encourage.
it's
We'll talk all day. Okay.
I love it.
Jeff, you're up. If you have a question or a comment, then followed by Bart, and then sorry, Jake, you're last. Jeff, are you up?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. So, Professor Williams, at the very beginning, when you were talking about the Declaration, you said, all men are created equal, but you drew a distinction that caught my attention. You said they're not equal, but they're created equal. And I wonder if you can comment on, because my problem is that right now, those that govern believe that they are better to govern than other people. And so, should all people be equal, not just created equal, but remain equal?
Yeah, it's like all pigs are equal. Some are just more equal than others. I
Right,
mean,
exactly.
to paraphrase Animal Farm. No, I mean it's a good question. I mean the difference I think that Lincoln really brings out in the course of the Lincoln Douglas debates is that it was a standard, right? It was an equality of principles. It was a quality of opportunity. It was a quality of opportunities for self-improvement, equality under the law, but especially that equality of rights, of human dignity, of freedom. We're practically unequal, right? And I mean, like, let's look at Stephen and I, for example. He's much smarter than I am. He's obviously much better looking than I am. Anyone looking at our screen right now can see that. He's a more virtuous man than I am. And yet,
Lies.
uh, yes, just turn his mic off.
Yeah.
And so all of that's true. And yet, I still, we still feel like, we're equal to each other, that we have equal dignity, equal rights, and we're equal under the law, right? That justice shouldn't be more for him if he's got $20 million. And I think to acknowledge what Jeff's saying, a lot of people do feel like, hey, things are unequal, right? Or the system is gamed against some people, or some people can sort of manipulate, government for their own wealth and their own self-interest, and that's, been pretty true, as some revelations have shown over the past few years. And we don't like it, right? And that's sort of maybe the point here is that Americans want to feel like we are equal under the law, that we all have an equal shot, that we all have sort of an equal shot at mobility, and that we all can improve ourselves, and we all have an equal right to pursue our happiness and be left alone and so forth, so that we have equal opportunity. Those things aren't perfectly true, but we want them to be true, and it should approximate the ideal as closely as possible. We will not. There will naturally be inequalities, right? Some people are going to be the CEO, and some people are going to be, in entry level. I mean, that is the way of the world. So, in a practical sense, there are inequalities, but in the larger sense of what it means to be an American, we did away with monarchy, and we did away with aristocracy, and we did away with buying commissions in the army and so forth, and inheriting everything. We did
And we
away
did
with
away with, and
entails.
Tony, we did away with violence, right? You just
No,
because you've got a bigger bicep or a stronger or more powerful
true.
gun
No,
or a bigger
right,
army,
right,
no, that's
right,
not an American
for
ideal,
sure.
right? We
Yeah,
we want to
yeah,
argue with our words, and if
yeah.
necessary, in the courts or the legislatures, but we argue with our words, not our fists. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think Lincoln reversed it and he said right makes might, right? And we don't want to live in a world where might makes right. And that might can be, yes, strength, army, but it can be wealth, it can be power, it can be sort of that inside track and so forth. And that's where I think you do have an awful lot of this sort of populist anger at elites, because there's just a sense here that the system is gamed against them. That my kids aren't going to go to Harvard, and I don't go to such and such wedding of one of the Clinton's daughter, or whatever. There's just a sense that all these insiders have that track, and the rest of us just don't. And that goes beyond just whether the fact of whether there's wealth inequality or not. It's sort of an inequality of power and influence and so forth. And the reality is important, but the perception is, I think, really fueling a lot of politics today.
So, Tony, you've dated yourself. The Clinton
I
daughter's
don't know.
wedding.
I don't
You're all
know. I
trying to
don't
get an
know.
invite to Travis Kelsey Taylor Swift wedding. I mean, what have
Sure,
you?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Professor Tootle, a quick retort to that, and we got two more questions, then we got to declare victory.
Uh, yeah, the founders did think about this question quite a bit, and Madison, author of the Constitution, said that, of course, equality of condition is impossible. And it would be the cure that's worse than the disease, because making everybody the same would require destroying our liberty of conscience. It would mean that the government would have to be involved in giving us what our goals in life should be, that it would even be possible to give everybody the same opinions. And he says, no, how human beings really are is that even when we have trifling differences, we'll blow them up to be massive differences. Watch any, I'm sure you can go on YouTube and look at fights between sports fans, even where no significant difference. I mean, they're both football fans, they're both Americans, and yet they'll find some reason to get in a fight with somebody else.
And
Um,
Professor, did you say that was Madison?
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, I need to.
Federalist 10. Everyone should read it.
Federalist
Federalist
10,
10.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, lightning round. We're way over. Bart, you're up if you have a question.
Okay, this one is really quick for you, Tony. You mentioned Elizabeth Cady Stanton a little while ago,
Mhm.
and you've talked a lot about Abraham Lincoln and stuff. Could you comment on Elizabeth Cady Stanton's statements around the time that the Civil Rights Amendments to the Constitution were adopted, about how they contributed to women's equality?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's very interesting. That's a very complex question, actually, because although the women of Seneca Falls in 1848, made a claim on the Declaration for women's rights, and not just suffrage, but just equal economic rights and educational opportunities and so forth. That they also made, during the time of the Civil War, when the question of the 15th Amendment for freed blacks comes up, Stanton says, okay, well, what about us? Like we women have a claim on this as well as a matter of justice, as a matter of equality. Um, and there's a whole dialogue there. It's a complex dialogue, and some of these women actually were pretty upset that people they considered sort of uneducated, whether it's immigrants or freed slaves who were banned from reading and so forth. A lot of these women had, pretty good educations and were middle class, upper middle class, and were pretty upset that what they consider quote unquote ignorant men were getting the vote before them. But they also supported the growth of equality and suffrage, but and would have liked everyone to get suffrage, but including them as well. Let's kind of remember the ladies, to quote Abigail Adams. She wanted the wanted people to remember in Washington, remember the ladies in the context of getting the 15th Amendment. And unfortunately didn't, right? So it applied to African American males. And of course, when women got suffrage, not until 1920. So it's another several decades.
Okay. Professor, comment or keep going?
No, just a reminder that that most of our laws are received from English common law, and many of our rights are associated with the household. And it's just a very difficult, long legal process to disentangle, um, in essence, like to continue to disentangle ourselves from a 2,000-year-old legal tradition and keep making these decisions about, well, here's where we parse it and go a little bit this way, and then, oh, what are the repercussions going to be? And that applies to women's rights very specifically, but also generally to this long story of um, considering how rights are to be considered under the law. Sorry if that's too
Yeah.
vague, but
Yeah, but it's really a really important role of the history professor, because Professor, I struggle regularly with trying to put myself back 250 years ago and what same person, same background, character, morals, would have engaged into the setting of the time. I think it's really difficult to do that it's hard enough to have empathy with your neighbor. Having empathy with your forefathers 250 years ago is a difficult struggle, at least for me. And that's the role of the history professor. Does that make some sense?
yeah, well, I mean, you have to constantly remind yourself that having a representative form of government means that everybody gets to be represented. It means that when you have a bunch of, not to pick on the Irish, but you've got the Irish Workingmen's Association of San Francisco or whatever, and they are vehemently anti-Chinese, but they all get to vote, and gosh, you have a perfectly good legal tradition called stare decisis that means that you have to honor previous legal decisions. But the California's first Supreme Court was a nightmare. I mean, full of a bunch of ignorant racists, and and you have to deal with their previous decision. It just is. This is hard work. This is why it requires an engaged citizenry. You can't just go along and say like, well, I don't know, some other smart person is going to be in charge of this. No, that's you. uh,
Love that.
get to work. Um,
That's a great quote, by the way. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Gosh, I've said it 5 times already. We're almost out of time. Honest, we're almost out of time. We get to go to Jake. Jake, question or comment? Lightning round.
Okay, I feel bad because I feel like every time I talk, I say something very depressing. But I mean, that's just kind of the state of things. So,
High
Tony,
school history teacher. Okay.
yeah. So I'm a high school history teacher at a fairly large high school in Utah. I have a master's degree from the Ashbrook Center, so I kind of know, American history and stuff. I am struggling to find relevance in my job anymore because I feel like, and John struggles to understand this, I feel like my students just do not care at all about anything I have to teach them. And we've got the 250th anniversary coming up, this year. How do I make American government and history come alive to them when literally all they want to do is sit on their phones?
Or become a social influencer as a profession.
Yeah,
Tony, do you have a response to that?
It's hard. I mean, I've struggled with this myself, even teaching college over the past few years, and we hear this a lot, from our teachers at the Bill of Rights Institute. How do we make this relevant? My kids just don't care. They care, more about Instagram. And maybe we've been complaining about kids for 4,000 years, I mean, these go back to Plato and others who were making similar complaints. I think that we need to get them talking to each other. I don't want it's going to be maybe very general what I'm saying, but is to engage them in these conversations, engage them in these questions of liberty and injustice in a way that they can understand, and in a way that they can relate to. And there are certainly questions of social media and TikTok and free speech and a lot of relevant issues online. People yelling at each other. Some of the most fruitful conversations I had teaching at Christopher Newport University 2 falls ago was that they were very interested in talking about social media and all the discord and like how can we be more united and so forth. So I think these kinds of questions are on their mind and they're relevant to their experience. Maybe not necessarily, not always Thomas Jefferson or, Abraham Lincoln or Frederick Douglass and their high-minded philosophy, but how do we bring these ideals down to a very practical way to what American citizens are thinking about today? I mean, we've heard from 4 or 5 of our fellow citizens today. And we're hearing some different things, sort of a pessimism, sort of a maybe a wait and see attitude. I mean, there's sort of, just sort of different reactions about how we're reacting to quote unquote being an American today in 2026 as this new year, this 250th anniversary of the Declaration unfolds. And this is what we need to talk about. Like, why we might be pessimistic. Why are we having a wait and see attitude? Or, why are some very optimistic about things? And and telling us why, examining why can maybe get to the heart of very quickly, I think, of what we're feeling and what we're thinking and maybe what problems we see out there and maybe some possible remedies that we can deliberate on together. I mean, that is sort of the purpose of living in a free society is that we have the spirit of a common purpose and we recognize each other as Americans and saying, look, we're in this endeavor together. So how can we go forward? I'm going to listen to what you have to say, and hopefully you'll listen to what I have to say, and let's work together towards that. But yes, professor, student, teacher, student, citizens, representative, citizen, populist, elite, we can talk past each other an awful lot. So maybe sitting down and putting our books aside for 5 minutes and just sitting down and listening to each other and sort of what we might feel optimistic or pessimistic about.
20 seconds or less, Professor Tootle.
Oh, if I say this in 20 seconds, it's going to sound really controversial and horrible. So the first thing you have to deal with, this is like the MASH version, triage and get you back for surgery later. But the first thing is you have to deal with distraction. You have to get the phones and the sleep deprivation out of their systems. Next, you cannot allow any sort of a victim narrative. And you want to do that in kindness, but you want to stay focused on human learning as the goal. Next, you need to have somebody above you in your job protecting you from the world of education. My friends and I now, when we use the word education, we mean anti-learning, which is a sad thing to say, but every time we mention someone, oh, they're from education, it means like, oh, this is somebody who does not want human beings to learn. And once you have those things in place, Jake, I'm ashamed of you as an Ashland graduate. You should know this. What you do is you put primary sources in front of them, and you start and you go sentence by sentence, word by word, line by line, and you break down that sentence, and you force people to read and understand primary sources, and you force people to write about primary sources. And then you don't worry about any kind of indoctrination. No, you don't. I always say, like, I don't have to indoctrinate my students or give them any sort of like political bias. History works on its own. These are the smartest people for 250 years have been thinking about what's important in the human experience and in the American experience. And so it speaks of its own importance, to quote Alexander Hamilton. Um, you don't have to. The students will, when they become no longer distracted, no longer sleep deprived, when you are engaged in human learning, they'll do it themselves. You just have to keep removing the impediments to learning that your bosses are putting in front of you, uh, and let the primary sources work their magic.
So that was excellent, but way longer than 20 seconds,
All
Professor. I've
right.
got to work on my facilitation skills. That really was excellent. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, 20-second follow-up to Jake. Fight the good fight, man. I mean, the Bill of Rights Institute is behind you. Stephen and I support you. Let us know what we can do. But it's hard. Teaching is hard work, right? Self-governance is hard work, right? All of this is very difficult, but it's worth the effort. I can think of very few jobs that are more important than teaching. And if you're passing on these ideals to the students and getting them to just grapple in some small way with the primary sources, like Stephen said, and the questions of what it means to be an American, what's the role of government, what's your role in the government and in society, what's America's role in the world, asking sort of these practical questions too. um that it'll pay great dividends for them being productive members of society and citizens in the future. But we know it's really hard work, and that's why the Bill of Rights Institute has your back. Let us know what we can do for you. But yeah, I think primary sources are great, but digging into these first principles and these important questions is the hard work we have to do.
Love that. So, Tony, in preparation for your book that's going to be released in June, Divided Over the Declaration, The Enduring Debate, and the Meaning of America, co-authored with David Bobb, you have read how many books like in the last year? I know you've probably read maybe thousands, but how many books did you read in preparation for writing your own book?
I mean, this I'm like, these are all on my desk. There's about 200 books on my desk right now that I'm surrounded by. I have this little narrow camera angle. I mean, like this is as I said earlier, for both of us, the culmination of 30 to 35 years of reading about this stuff, and not only reading books. Sure, I've read thousands of books and poured over hundreds and hundreds of them, poured over countless primary sources in writing the book, many of which I'd never even seen before, but were important to the story. So I started reading them. And it's just part of a lifetime journey for both David and I. And hopefully it's a journey that won't end. But it's also rooted in all the conversations over the years I've had with students and with my fellow citizens over beer, over coffee, over dinner, on shows like this, conversations with you, conversation with Stephen, and hundreds and hundreds of other scholars over the years. I mean, it's really all of that. It's not just reading a bunch of books, although it is that. But it's part of a vibrant conversation that I've dedicated my life to.
Just extraordinary. So for our 135th show, what a great honor to have an author, Tony Williams, with us on such an important topic. Professor Tootle, as always, you get the last word.
I just want to say, Jake knows I'm not actually ashamed of him. I'm always proud of Jake,
Of course.
fighting the good fight. And I also recognize that there are many educational administrators who are not, conceived of pure evil and doing the devil's work. But it certainly for almost every, in fact, I can't think of, this is a sad thing to say, I can't think of any teachers I know who don't sound like that. Um, so maybe they're out there. Maybe there are teachers out there who feel supported by their administration and their quest for human learning. But
Thanks for caring about your friend Jake, our mutual friend. But overall comment on America or Tony.
Just say, thanks, Tony. It's been too long since I've seen your beautiful face. Although, actually, I feel like we need to have a longer conversation about watches at some point.
I saw that post.
You have
maybe.
we have similar yet distinct philosophies on watches, and somehow I ended up as a Hamilton Seiko man, and I forget what's the brand. Almost all of yours are
Jeffersonian.
no, what is it? What's the brand?
It's Movado and
Movado,
some
yeah.
others. Yeah.
So at some point, maybe that's a phone conversation or a text conversation, but I do want
Thanks
to
for
talk
dividing us, Tony. I'm neither a watch guy or a motorcycle guy. Now I feel more estranged from Professor Tootle than ever.
Yeah, well, we need to get Hiram Lewis on here so we can talk about motorcycles for 3 hours straight.
Gentlemen,
And not the myth of left and right, but
yeah. Gentlemen, thank you for your conversation. If there's a remote chance we might get you back in June or July around our actual anniversary to talk about the release of your book. Tony, sorry to go 20 minutes over. What a great honor to have you today. Professor Tootle, well done as always. Have a great day, gentlemen.
great to see you.
Thank you.
Take it easy, Tony.